This is the Wait For It podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Wait For It podcast. I am your co-host, Phil Barrera, aka Phil the Filipino.
And I'm your other co-host, Mr. Eric Almighty. And for this edition of the Wait For It podcast, we have a very special episode for you today with the mind behind Mad Dog Morgan, which is a graphic novel where all-out indie wrestling collides with a blood-drenched haunted house.
Yeah, we are thrilled to have Adam Lawson with us today to talk about the creative process, this very unique mix of genres, and also what backers can expect from this campaign. So Adam, thank you so much for joining us, and how are you doing tonight?
I am awesome. I am a happy man, because talking comics is my favorite thing. Whether it's my own or someone else's, it's always a good day. Wednesday is just like, yes. So, it's good to be on the podcast with you guys. I love your passion for comics. It's awesome.
Yeah, we've had some really great opportunities. Shout out to our friend Chris, who of course brought this across our door once again. And while we are, an all-encompassing podcast, just getting to learn more about these comics and graphic novels has been so cool, and really expanding our boundaries as well over here, Eric, which has been really, really great. So Adam, my first question for you, well, actually first, if you wanted to just take a brief moment to give us a synopsis and our audience a synopsis of Mad Dog Morgan before I get into the first question.
Yeah, so Mad Dog Morgan is, the wrestler meets the Shining. This is, as you said, all-out indie wrestling meets a blood-drenched haunted house. It's a tale of Mitchell Mad Dog Morgan, who is an indie wrestler who never made it to the big time. And that was always his dream, and he never made it. And he's bottomed out in his life. His alcohol addiction has taken over, and he's realized all his naysayers were right. He was never going to become something. So he goes to this abandoned house, and he's going to drink himself to death, only to realize that this house he's gone to is not just any house, it's a haunted house. And it's been luring him in for years. And it wants to transform him into one of the horrors that haunt this house, as it has done to thousands of others before it. People at the bottom, it sucks them in. And so Mad Dog then, here at the bottom, so to speak, of his life, at the the epitome of all his failures, he can't even kill himself correctly, comes to discover that all his failures actually led him to this moment. That really the main event of his life was not in the ring, but was in this house. And it was to do battle with this house and to free the souls inside of it, and sort of including redeeming his own failed life. So it's this great tale of redemption and action and horror all mishmashed into one. And I have a deep love of wrestling, and I grew up on it. I still watch it to this day, and I love this sort of fantastical world of wrestling, because it's really fantasy, right? It's a great game of make believe with athletics. But somebody who has that sort of dual life where they are trying to be bigger than life, but inside they're dying. That's Mad Dog Morgan in a nutshell. And obviously, once he gets inside this house, there's a lot of complexities and horror and monsters and psychological enemies as well. Yeah, so that's the elevator pitch if we had several floors.
The main event wasn't in the ring. It was the man. I got chills. I love that so much.
Bars. Yeah, straight bars.
So good. So yeah, as we mentioned before we got started, Eric and I are huge wrestling fans.
Yeah.
Of course, horror as well. I very much love the paranormal. So I love this mixture here. I want our audience to get to know you a little bit more as well before we get into more of the story and how this came together, because you have a track record of blending intense horror with really deep character-driven storytelling. We've seen that in, of course, The Exiled, Kids and Monsters, Kill Journal. Each of those projects feels very unique, but they all seem to share a common thread of exploring human emotion and resilience in the face of darkness. It's very much what's happening here with Mad Dog. Can you walk us through your creative journey as a writer and how those past experiences have shaped your approach and how it ultimately led you to Mad Dog Morgan?
Yeah, I think, from the creative process standpoint, I think for myself as a storyteller, I think that, horror is such an exciting arena for me because, it's essentially a fantasy world. And with it, you can sort of throw out the window of maybe sort of the political complications and struggles of sort of modern day, and you can put somebody in sort of an altered reality, so you can focus on a particular theme or human struggle without maybe getting caught up in sort of the day-to-day things that can bog down a story. And so that's why I love it as an arena, because I feel like it's like one of the best arenas to tell a drama that isn't a boring drama. And so I think that's why I've always kind of find myself there, with the Kill Journal. It's the story of trauma survivors trying to reclaim their lives while they hunt slashers, right? So it's really, that's the story tucked into the horror. And, you know, with the exiled, right, you have essentially a guy trying to reconnect with his father, caught up in this war that's much bigger than himself with creatures and monsters. And, you know, with kids and monsters, it's the same thing. It's two kids, you know, dealing with their parents' potential divorce and how that plays out. So I think at the heart of what I am as a storyteller, I like to, you know, remove sort of the trappings of the real world and put us in a fantasy so we can really dial in these human themes that I think have a broader relationship to people. I think everybody knows that it feels like to have felt like, man, maybe my life, I kind of screwed up. I'm kind of a failure. Everybody knows that feeling of wanting to redeem their failings. And so I think that Mad Dog Morgan can connect with anybody. And then my personal creative process, you know, like for myself, I handwrite my comics, you know, for a lot of it. I'm writing them on notebooks or handwriting the dialogue, sometimes doing even layouts myself. I try to keep it as organic as possible in the early stages when it's being the inception. And then when I pass it to an artist, you know, I type it up so they're not just looking at chaos on a page. But I like that organic space where there's nothing electronic around you to conceive, you know. And a lot of the inspiration is, you know, around me is coming from real world things, you know, like Mad Dog Morgan's. I keep wanting to say Mad Dog Mormon. That could be another comic. But
I'd read that too, honestly.
You're ready. But with Mad Dog, you know, it comes back to this documentary I watched about wrestling. You might have seen it, Behind the Mask. And in this, Jake the Snake is being interviewed, if you can remember him back in the day. And he gets asked a question about his dad, and it just triggers the guy. And he starts crying, and he's talking about how he never was able to live up to his dad's expectations, and like his dad passed, and then he never got there. And there's this sort of this emptiness, and you're just like, and I was gut punched by it, right? And I think that was the early beginnings for myself, you know, of this story of what is Jake the Snake story, but if it didn't get into the WWF at the time, you know, like where does he end up? Is really where it begins for me. So I think the real world is where I search for things that then inspire the fantasy.
Yeah, love that. I mean, how many Mad Dogs are there out there, right, that pursued this wrestling journey and just came up short and eventually had to reevaluate and figure out what was next for them, Eric? You know, we've had indie wrestlers on the podcast, you know, that tell their story and where they've, you know, how difficult that journey can be. So this is, again, something that definitely caught our eye for sure.
No, it was absolutely from everything that we read about the press release and everything, all the details, the synopsis, the description, the art, which we're going to get into in a little bit here. Like, there's so much to love when it comes to this. Adam, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, you know, kind of our first impression from the press release was Mad Dog Morgan would be perfect for fans of Do a Powerbomb, The Shining. You mentioned The Wrestler, which immediately came to mind when I saw the art. So I love that you threw that in there. There's obviously other influences that you're going to find in work like this, but what I find more interesting is getting a chance to pick the mind behind the work. So I'd like to actually ask you, what are some other pop culture influences that you've had over the years that have impacted you professionally, creatively, and or personally?
Yeah, it's interesting you say like pop culture influences. I think about, you know, from like in the world of comics, I think a comic that's always sat with me is Berserk, Kentaro Miura's Berserk. I think it's maybe the greatest ever done. It's just such this epic tale of this character Guts, you know, that one has always sat with me. It's interesting because, you know, this tale with Mad Dog Morgan, there's this video game I played when I was very young that's always sat with me called Alone in the Dark. It was this Cthulhu-like game, and you go into this house and you kind of get into deeper levels of the basement, and you sort of, the evil expands as you do. And I think that feeling has always sat with me, and it plays out in the world of Mad Dog Morgan. You come into an evil house, and then as you go down the levels in the house, deeper into the basement, you know, the horror becomes crazier and more volatile, right? So I think that was a big thing. And, you know, interesting enough with this story, the story of Samson, you know, that biblical story of when he's standing between the two pillars and he pushes them down, you know, after Delilah's cut his hair, kind of played a piece of this. It kind of was what gave me the other side of the story was, it's like, oh wait, Samson looked like he'd failed. He got betrayed by Delilah. He lost all his strength, but then really he got set between those two pillars, and that was his real destiny, right? To collapse the tower, to collapse the building and kill the enemy. And it's like, oh, what if in the end what looked like your failure was actually just setting you up to win? So Those are definitely some influences. You can kind of see it's kind of crazy between like biblical comic books, video games, right? It's a lot of things going at you. I think definitely, Do a Powerbomb is interesting because I was writing Mad Dog Morgan when Daniel Warren Johnson started to tease he was going to do a wrestling comic. And in the background, I'm like, please don't, is it a horror wrestling comic? Because if it is, I'm going to look like a phony. And so fortunately it wasn't, and it's, I love Daniel so much, his art. And I think, Extremity was one of the books that I think really increased my love of comics. It's kind of like there's two that like really dove me in deep. It was Extremity and then 100 Bullets. I was doing Snakes on a Plane, and Sam Jackson came to set reading it. And I remember looking at that and I was like, gosh, if it's cool enough for him, it's gotta be cool enough for me. And I remember reading that comic and being like, oh, this is what they can really be. And it was really, really eye-opening for me. So, but Do a Powerbomb definitely, as far as like the sheer joy of the action, the wrestling action who does not love that?
Yeah, and I think that's really cool because like it's such an interesting time for this to drop too, because like wrestling and horror are both kind of seeing like a renaissance. Like horror's in the best place that it's been in a long time, and the same can be said for wrestling. So like I just love the merge of those two things. And wrestling fans in general, Adam, like you gave us like a smorgasbord of options in pop culture. I always find when I talk to wrestling fans that that's the case. They have the most diverse taste of like pop culture enjoyment. It all comes back to wrestling. Every single genre has made its way to wrestling one way or another.
I agree. There's something about, I don't know if you're watching Raw, on Netflix now, they've really leveled it up in a fun way, and Rhea Ripley's so epic, out there in the ring, and just even this little last bit with Senna. But it's like, I agree with you, because when you're looking at wrestling fans, like you see this tough dude with his big gnarly truck and his D&D books in the back. You know what I mean? And he's there at the wrestling event, and it's like, the mix there is something different.
Yeah, sports entertainment itself is something different. It is something to behold. And, I got to say, Phil, kind of throwing it back to you, because I know this is something you immediately picked up on when we were talking about doing this interview, was just the amazing art style here. Like when we talk about a graphic novel and just getting interested right off of the visuals, I think that's so important here. And Phil, I gotta say, for Mad Dog Morgan, knocking it out of the park with first impressions.
100%. Yeah, Adam, you and Maxi Dall'o have partnered quite a few times, and it always leads to something really, really great. So when you're blending, these two genres, wrestling and horror, there's a lot to think about, just outside of just making the story itself blend. You want to make sure that the art style blends as well. Wrestling has, like you just talked about, has this bold, colorful, exaggerated energy to it, and while horror thrives on atmosphere and the shadow and tension, and translating both of those into a single visual language feels like it could be a really big challenge. But from an artistic standpoint, what were some of the biggest hurdles that you and Maxi faced making those two very different aesthetics coexist? And then on the flip side, were there any moments in the creative process where everything like clicked and you realized, oh, we found it, and we found the perfect way to visually balance the spectacle of wrestling with the dread of horror?
Yeah, it's interesting you say, because here is the cover, for Mad Dog Morgan, for anybody watching this, and you can see it's him there with the mask on, and this mask kind of becomes the source of his power. It ties into the supernatural side of the story, and the bloody mask. There was something when Maxi early on, this was one of the first images that he and I did, and there was something once he put the blood on the wrestling mask that instantly we were in that world of horror. So I think as we were trying to find that balance, because I agree with you, there is like a color palette that wrestling in black and white is maybe too muted, right? It kind of demands color. This is the cover here for the Ash Can. Mike Spicer did the colors here for this, and who I love. And you can see how he uses these bold purples and reds and yellows. And at first we thought, that's going to contradict the art style, because Maxi has such a great sense of energy and action, which wrestling needed to have. But then he's also such great use of silhouette and shadow, which I think contributes to the horror side of it. So that was oftentimes the discussion. But what I think we came to find is when you took something like this where you're getting sort of these pinks and purples in this mix, but because of Maxi's very moody lines, all the negative space in there, the blacks, the very hand-drawn feeling to it, instead of them contradicting each other, they complement each other, right? And it also prevents the horror from becoming just too moody and like, it kind of, because sometimes horror can drone on if it's too in the dumps, right? And I think that like Weapons and Barbarian were great examples of horror movies that like didn't let it get too just flat and like you felt kind of like the drudgery of horror. And so I think they ended up kind of complementing each other in a unique way. And one of the big things I think about it was creating these kinds of visuals in the eyes. If you can see here, Maxi does this great thing where he has his eyes almost kind of popping out of his head. You can see the veins in them when he's showing fear. And those slightly exaggerated emotions that can come from Maxi's caricatured art really elevated the feeling of horror. And I think that's one thing, that manga artists do well is they exaggerate the faces and the emotion just a little bit more sometimes in a Western comics. And I think it serves it because as an audience, it helps trigger you when you don't have sound, to know what you're feeling. And because here's another great page. You can see that Maxi, speaking of that eye, right, to build up this fear. And for those on the podcast, it's Mad Dog Morgan. There's this tentacle that's wrapping around him and choking him off, and he's getting smaller and smaller on the page. You can just see just his one eye. And the fear in that eye is really what Max and I talked about so much, is like, how can we get the fear to translate in the eyes, which is kind of a cinematic trait versus as often thought about in comics, but getting those eyes super big in the frame. So I think that's kind of how we went about it. And at first I agree with you, we were like, where does this fit? And then that mask happened with the blood on it, and it was like, okay, that there it is.
Yeah, it looks really great. One thing that also stands out, and Eric, you let me know if you feel the same way, this would make Mad Dog would make for a really cool cosplay. I would love to see somebody cosplaying this character.
Cosplay, I was going to say, is it too early to talk about like an animated project? Like, I'm going to be honest, the second...
Action, who we got to call?
Phil already knew I got giddy the second you started mentioning like that manga and anime comparison with eyes. Like, Phil knows one of my favorite things about watching like an anime or reading a manga is what they do specifically through the eyes. So those examples you gave are just like absolutely fantastic to hear about, because those are the things that get me excited. And I could just only imagine again what this looks like on the pages. I'm already thinking ahead. Are you stopping yourself from thinking that far ahead? Like, I'm already over here listening, thinking ahead of what it looks like in other forms of media. What's your kind of thought process as you're getting into this, about the future? I know we're just at the start. We're going to talk about the Kickstarter here in a second, but like, looking at the horizon, are you stopping yourself? Are you getting giddy as well? Yeah. Where are you at?
Yeah, no, it's funny you say that because, I've made a lot of television in my time, but I love comic books for what they are. When I did the book with Wesley Snipes, they were asking Snipes, do you see this as is your greatest hope for it to be a movie? And I said, my greatest hope is for people to read it. You know what I mean? For actually people, because when people pick it up and read it, there's a love and a connection and a fandom there that's real deep. And I think that's in my heart the most. I've been building this trailer for the Kickstarter that's in animation, and that does get me thinking anime for sure. I'm not gonna lie, because I'm a big anime fan, especially with the retro anime, because there's something about, like, when you look at those guys are doing like that cell animation, hand-drawn stuff with all the emotion in those faces and in the details, and you're like, I don't know why we're not, and you can't get it now. Like we have all this assistance with computers, and like, how come we went backwards? So, I mean, I love, the animation format and anime so much. I think about like a Tomo so much, and what he did with Akira, with not only just in the manga version, but in the film, like what you mentioned, the eyes, was really a big deal. I try not to let myself get dreaming too big, because then I forget the moment I'm in. But every now and again, when we're working on the animation, I go, and then I bring myself down very quickly, pop that balloon.
No, that's completely normal. That is completely normal. And again, we're really excited to bring this to our audience, to get more people to know about this, to read it. You've definitely got some backers over here. Like, again, we pretty much knew when Chris sent us the deets. Like, we were like, all right, yeah, that's that's a wrap. So for anybody else that's considering supporting you, as part of this exclusive crowdfunding effort, which is launching on October 7th of this year, 2025. There's going to be 2 campaign exclusive editions, some add-ons for Mad Dog Morgan that you can't get anywhere else. Can you tell our audience, as we kind of wrap up, a little bit of what they can expect if they back this on Kickstarter?
Yeah, so I'm a big crowdfunder. I've personally backed more than 400 campaigns, so I'm in it deep. I've done several campaigns myself between board games, role-playing games, and tons of comics. And I love that experience of kind of taking the ride, getting in on the new thing. And so when launching this book, it'll be in retail stores, mid to late 2026. But I wanted to do a crowdfunder that was going to give all the fans, the people who supported me along the way, something totally different and something special. And so one is the cover for the book will be an exclusive variant that will only exist in this. And for the lab, my printing partner on it, my publishing partner on it, they only do hardcover. So it'll be a hardcover slipcase book that you're getting. It will have this incredible image here of him smashing the lector here. This will be a foil print. This will be the only way to ever get it. It'll be signed by Maxi and I. And then this, so it'll be a special cover. There'll be the special foil print. And for those who back in the first 48 hours, they'll get the New York City Comic-Con ash can, which will be essentially the only way to get it if you aren't one of just a very small handful of people who grabs it in New York. And that gets it for you on any tier level if you're in the first 48 hours. So it's like, how can we give you something like you jumped on early so you get this exclusive, incredible item that no one else is ever going to get? And for anybody watching, here's the cover for the ash can. Obviously no trade dress, but just the colored art. And then as you mentioned, the cosplay. So there is going to be the Hell's Cannonball t-shirt that's going to be out there. That's his signature move in the book. There is going to be the mask is going to be an item. There's going to be a leather-bound edition of the book. That's going to be a special tier that will only ever exist, here for the campaign. There's going to be patches and headband. There's going to be all the cool things that make it feel like you got the inside track. You got the special item. And I'm a fan. I'm a collector, so I love you guys are in the same boat as I am, and I think many people on Kickstarter and crowdfunding spaces are. You want the special thing, and so that's what we're going to be throwing at you with it. We're going to keep it real simple. There's just going to be 2 tiers. One for the exclusive variant Kickstarter edition of the book, and then there'll be a big mega tier, called the main event, which will be the leather bound edition, which will have the mask. It will have the ash can. It will have the patch, the t-shirt. It'll be the full package. And then also everything will be add-ons except for the ash can. You can never get more than one. And so if you want to build your own tier. So that's I think what they're looking forward to with it. It's a chance to dive in deep.
Yeah, definitely. And like Eric mentioned, we are going to be keeping very, very close watch on this. Very excited to also support. And for those of you listening, we definitely implore you to check out the artwork that has been shared over our YouTube page. So make sure you check that out. And everything Adam just mentioned as far as the crowdfunding and the Kickstarter will be in the show notes of this episode, Eric. So again, very, very excited to follow this project.
Yeah, and Adam, thank you so much for giving us the time. Like, it is very much appreciated, and I know getting the word out is super, super important. Is there anything else that you want to say? Any last words for anybody that's thinking about, again, backing this project, getting involved, anything at all that you'd like to plug here? I'd love to give you that opportunity as we close out the episode.
In the world of, the MCU and the DCU, there is this magical vortex of creators throwing their whole hearts into their work and putting it out before the world. And, comic book collectors and even wrestling fans or horror fans, what makes us cool is that we're on the front row. And getting in on the campaign puts you in the front row of not just this book, but just, comic books as a medium in general. And so it's like, if you've never backed before, just jump on in. It's fun. The book is done, so there isn't going to be some 2-year wait on this kind of thing. It's going to be, we'll get the numbers, and then we'll make a print order based on it. So you won't have to wait, and you get to be in on the ground floor of something truly special. So join the ride. The water's warm.
Awesome, Adam. Again, so thank you so much for joining us. And I can tell you guys now, from the artwork jumping off the pages, from your passion jumping through the mic, jumping off the screen, like I'm telling you, we're on board. We're excited, and we're excited to have more people get to know about this. Adam, we appreciate it. And for all of you guys listening to the Wait For It podcast, we really appreciate your support. An extra bonus shout out to our patrons that are supporting us monthly: Briar, T3 Cato, Vintage Macaroni, Corey from The World Is My Burrito, Nick Casbaro, the author of the Vitellarium series, and Botter from the Short Box podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, we got a lot more. Please just remember, all you got to do before you press play is wait for it.
This is the Wait For It podcast.